during the cardiac cycle, the blood pressure changes, right? When the ventricle is contracting, the blood is hitting the aorta forcefully, blood pressure is high. When the ventricle is relaxing, it's not pumping blood out. The blood is not hitting the wall of the aorta forcefully, so blood pressure is low, which is why blood pressure has two numbers. What's a normal blood pressure?
120/80.
Okay, so the top number is always higher because it's systolic. That means it's the blood pressure during systole. What's the ventricle doing during systole? Contracting. So that's when the blood is hitting the wall of the aorta, so that number is high. So that's systolic blood pressure. Diastolic blood pressure is blood pressure during diastole. So the ventricle is relaxed, so the blood is not hitting the aorta as forcefully, so blood pressure is low. It's normal during exercise for your systolic blood pressure to increase. Because as you increase your exercise intensity, that left ventricular myocardium is going to contract more forcefully, the blood is going to come out and hit the wall harder, so that number is going to go up. Diastolic blood pressure shouldn't, because that's when the ventricle is filling. So the blood shouldn't be hitting the aorta any harder. If your diastolic blood pressure goes up during exercise, that's a medical emergency. That should not happen. But systolic goes up. Okay, formula for blood pressure. Cardiac output times peripheral resistance. Peripheral resistance is the resistance that your heart has to work against to move the blood. Peripheral resistance is the resistance that your heart has to work against to move the blood. So imagine you're trying to push a loaded sled. The heavier that sled is, the more resistance it's giving you, it's harder to push. Right? So if there's a lot of resistance, if the heart is working against a lot of resistance, it's hard for it to push the blood out. If you unload the sled and push an unloaded sled, it's really easy, there's less resistance. So if resistance is low, it's easy for the heart to move the blood out. Okay? Peripheral resistance depends on the length of the vessel times the viscosity of the blood. He probably wants to know what's for dinner. Viscosity of the blood divided by the radius of the vessel to the fourth power. I'm going to explain all of these right now. Length of the vessel times the viscosity of the blood divided by the radius of the vessel to the fourth power. So, for the length of the vessel, imagine you and your friends are both drinking water from a straw. Excuse me.
You should know I'm in classroom.
Is the firefighter son or the
Firefighter son, yes. Okay. Okay, you and your friend are both drinking water out of a straw. You have a normal 6-inch straw. Your friend has a 6-foot-long straw. Who's going to have a harder time? Can you imagine trying to get water through a 6-foot-long straw? Very difficult. The longer the vessel, the more resistant it is to flow. Okay? So an increase in length of the vessel would cause an increase in resistance. That increase in resistance would cause an increase in blood pressure. Can we change the length of our vessels?
Yes.
We can. We can. If you gain weight, you have to vascularize that tissue. So, 1 pound of fat adds about 500 miles of vessels. 1 pound of fat adds about 500 miles of vessels. So imagine for someone who is obese, how hard their heart has to work to deliver oxygen to their body.
Speaking of fat.
Okay,
Excuse
excuse me.
Just answer the phone. Yeah, just put him on speaker. We'll all yell at
You
him.
can't not answer respect my authority. That's like indicative of what you gotta do.
He's exhausted from his firefighter duties
Aw.
and is upset that I'm not there to make dinner.
Is it, that's psychological, right? The
What
fatigue.
department does he work for?
He just started, he's in the academy for the Forest Service.
For Cal Fire or? the
No,
US?
the LA County Forest Service.
Oh, okay.
They're working him really hard.
I guess why did he need more money or food?
He's too tired to go to the store. We don't have anything to put in the pasta.
Or you can put more pasta in the
He wants meat.
Oh.
There's chicken.
Yeah.
There's chicken in the fridge. Put that in the pasta.
Fire the building. Yeah, right?
Okay, so someone who is obese has very long vessels, which is going to give them high blood pressure, which is going to make them very likely to have a heart attack. That's why one of the reasons those things are so highly correlated. But as the person loses weight, the vessels will shorten, the blood pressure will go down.
They shorten by the same ratio they increase, so will it never be back?
I'm not sure. Viscosity of the blood is thickness. So if something is viscous, it means it's thick. So you and your friend both have regular 6-inch straws, but you are drinking water and your friend is trying to drink chocolate pudding through the straw.
Oh, it's totally gonna.
That's difficult, right? The thicker it is, the more resistant it is to flow. So if your blood is thick, if your blood is viscous, it's hard to get the blood to move through the vessels. So an increase in viscosity would cause an increase in resistance, would cause an increase in blood pressure. Go ahead.
What causes increase in viscosity?
That's my next question.
Oh, wow.
Can we change the viscosity of our blood?
Yes.
How? Primarily through hydration. So if you are dehydrated, your blood becomes more viscous, which is going to increase resistance, which is going to increase blood pressure. There are other things that can affect viscosity, which we'll get to at the end of this chapter, but primarily it's going to be hydration status. Radius of the vessel is how wide or narrow it is. So you and your friend are both drinking water. You have one of those big fat smoothie straws, and your friend has one of those teeny tiny little red straws they use to stir your coffee. You ever tried to drink through one of those? It's very difficult, right? The narrower it is, the more resistant it is to flow. So that means a decrease in radius will cause an increase in resistance. So notice there's an inverse relationship here. Radius goes down, resistance goes up. If radius were to go up and the vessels get wider, resistance would go down. Okay? Length and viscosity have a direct relationship to resistance. They go up together or down together. Radius has an inverse relationship. They go opposite. So, can we control the radius of our vessels? We can. What's it called when we do that? Vasoconstriction is when the vessel gets narrower. That's a decrease in radius. Vasodilation is when the vessel gets wider. That would be an increase in radius. Where does that happen?
arterial.
In the arterioles. That's where the smooth muscles are. That's where we can get vasoconstriction and vasodilation.
So does that mean we can only control like one way through of our blood vessels, the actual like peripheral resistance? Like we can't control it on the venous side, we can only control it on the venous
Right, it's
side.
the arterioles that have the muscular walls, the veins don't. But it doesn't help us to control the veins because we're trying to control blood flow to this muscle. So controlling in the veins won't help. We need to control in the arteries. Okay. You need a new piece of paper. You need lots of space and turn it sideways. I'm gonna erase this drawing, is that okay? Anybody need a photo? Good?
Is this another taking up the entire whiteboard thing?
Yes, it is.
Yay. Our favorite.
It's not as big. This one's not as big.
Like causes too.
Part two.
Okay, so the formula for blood pressure equals cardiac output times peripheral resistance. But we can break down cardiac output into what times what?
Heart rate, stroke volume.
Heart rate times stroke volume, and then we can break down peripheral resistance into length, viscosity, and radius. So this is the short version of the formula. This is the expanded version of the formula. Heart rate times stroke volume times length times viscosity over radius to the fourth. This is peripheral resistance, cardiac output.
This is chemistry.
Okay, so we said it's normal for systolic blood pressure to increase during exercise. So we're going to go over the mechanism behind that, what causes the increases in systolic blood pressure during exercise. So if we're trying to explain increases in blood pressure, we've got to talk about all the factors that contribute to blood pressure. So we're going to go through what happens to each of those when you're exercising. What happens to your heart rate when you're exercising? What controls that?
Sympathetic nervous system.
Yes,
The SA node is the effector. We talked about three things that act on the SA node as part of extrinsic control of heart rate. What are they?
Vagal tone?
Okay, what's happening to vagal tone?
It's decreasing.
Decreased vagal tone as part of a decrease in parasympathetic nervous system activity because we're exercising. Okay, so we're kind of drawing a map here. We start exercising, that decreases our parasympathetic nervous system activity, which decreases vagal tone. That acts on the SA node to cause an increase in heart rate. That increase in heart rate will cause an increase in cardiac output, which will cause an increase in blood pressure. We okay so far? Okay, what else acts on the SA node to cause an increase in heart rate? Okay, sympathetic cardiac nerve. This is because of increased sympathetic nervous system activity because we're exercising. Sympathetic cardiac nerve will act on the SA node to increase heart rate, which will increase cardiac output, which will increase blood pressure. What's the third thing? Which is released because of increased sympathetic nervous system activity because we're exercising. So you start exercising, that increases your sympathetic nervous system activity, that causes the release of epinephrine. Epinephrine acts on the SA node to increase your heart rate, which increases cardiac output, which increases blood pressure.
I should not have those.
Questions so far? What controls stroke volume?
Systolic and
What's the effector?
the left ventricular myocardium.
Left ventricular myocardium. I'm going to abbreviate this, but you need to know what that stands for. So, something is going to act on the left ventricular myocardium during exercise to make it contract more forcefully.
The Purkinje fibers, because it's contracting the.
So anytime you have to guess what might be causing something during exercise, your best guess is always epinephrine, because it's going to affect almost everything. Epinephrine is going to act on the left ventricular myocardium to increase its contraction strength. left ventricular myocardium increases its contraction strength, more blood is going to come out. That's an increase in stroke volume. That increase in stroke volume will cause an increase in cardiac output, which will cause an increase in blood pressure. Epinephrine is secreted because of an increase in sympathetic nervous system activity because you're exercising. Is the length of your vessel going to change during exercise?
No.
No. Is your viscosity going to change during exercise?
Yes.
It could if you become dehydrated. I'm not going to put that on there right now. I'm going to save that for later in the semester, but that is also happening. We're going to focus right now on what's happening in radius because even small changes in radius will have an effect on blood pressure because this is to the fourth power. So most of the changes that occur in peripheral resistance are because of radius. So we're talking about what's causing an increase in blood pressure. So we're going to be getting an increase in peripheral resistance. What has to happen to the radius in order to get an increase in peripheral resistance?
That's a decrease.
Decrease in radius will cause an increase in resistance. What's it called when we get a decrease in radius?
Vasoconstriction.
Vasoconstriction. And what controls that? Where does it occur?
The arterial.
So that's the effector. What do you think is going to act on the arterioles to make them vasoconstrict? That's a good guess.
Wow.
Because of increased sympathetic nervous system activity, because you're exercising. So you start exercising, that activates your sympathetic nervous system, causes you to secrete epinephrine. Epinephrine acts on the arterioles to cause vasoconstriction. That decreases the radius of your vessels, which causes an increase in peripheral resistance, which causes an increase in blood pressure. Okay, so this map gives you a detailed explanation for what causes the increases in systolic blood pressure during exercise. I am not going to ask you to draw this map. But I'm going to ask you questions about how we control blood pressure.
The answer is always exercise.
So, for example, sample test question. Explain in detail 3 ways that epinephrine contributes to the increases in systolic blood pressure during exercise. We've got epinephrine on here 3 different times.
How would
Okay.
you word its effect on the SA node?
So, exercise increases sympathetic nervous system activity, which causes the release of epinephrine. Epinephrine acts on the SA node, causing an increase in heart rate,
Just acts on it.
which causes an increase in cardiac output, which causes an increase in blood pressure. That epinephrine also acts on the left ventricular myocardium, making it contract more forcefully, causing more blood to come out. That increase in stroke volume causes an increase in cardiac output, causes an increase in blood pressure. The epinephrine also acts on the arterioles, causing vasoconstriction, which causes a decrease in the vessel radius, causing an increase in peripheral resistance and an increase in blood pressure. Okay, so being able to draw this map is going to help you remember all the details to answer that question, but I do not want you to draw this map. The map is to help you organize, just like the outline for the reflexes was to help you organize and not miss any details, but I do not want you to draw me that outline. Go ahead.
We just draw it on the side so we know.
You can draw it on the side, I'm not gonna look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can draw it on the side. But I can ask all kinds of questions about the control of blood pressure. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Time is up. So I'm early.
Chickens in the fall season.
No, it won't be.
This is my last class, please. Spring break.
Yeah, this is as far as I got in my other classes, so it's as far as I'm gonna go. So, go ahead, Gabby.
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes, my question was, explain in detail 3 ways that epinephrine contributes to increases in systolic blood pressure during exercise. Do you imagine if I asked you that question 3 months ago?
Yeah, we call you.
I'd like to drop.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so, next week is spring break, so I won't see you for 2 weeks. I do want you to have fun and relax and enjoy your spring break, but I also don't want you to fall behind. Okay, I'm not gonna reteach all this. I'm gonna do a quick review of it and then I'm gonna continue. So you need to spend some time on this over the next 2 weeks.